They told me I wouldn't survive the winter. Not in those exact words, of course. My father couched it in a sigh, my mother in a shake of her head, my sister in a laugh that cut sharper than any blade. But the message was clear. That night, I lay awake on the stiff guest room mattress of my parents' mansion, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above me. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something colder, something like distance. My world had collapsed 3 weeks earlier. My husband, Eric, had walked out after draining the joint account down to $27. The company I'd poured 6 years into folded in less than 6 weeks. And here I was, 39 years old, with a 15-year-old hatchback and exactly $84 left in my checking account. Claire, my older sister, always composed like she was born wearing pearls, had leaned across the marble kitchen island that morning and whispered to my mother, loud enough for me to hear, "She doesn't even look like she wants to be alive." My mother had simply pursed her lips, as if agreeing but too refined to say it out loud. My father had looked at me for half a second before muttering something about not everyone being built to handle the real world. I remember wondering what they thought the real world was. Because to me, it was that very room I was sleeping in, perfectly climate-controlled, beautifully decorated, and utterly lifeless. I stayed 3 more days. I pretended not to hear them discussing me like a failed investment they regretted ever funding. They didn't know I overheard my father on the phone telling a business partner, "She's fragile." If I'm being honest, I don't expect her to make it through the winter without some kind of breakdown. Something inside me cracked then, but not the way they expected. It wasn't a collapse. It was quieter. A thin, almost invisible line forming between me and them, like frost tracing the edge of a window. On the 4th morning, I loaded my few boxes into the back of my car before anyone woke up. The sky was still pale and silver, like it hadn't made up its mind yet. I left a thank you note on the kitchen counter, though I don't think anyone ever read it. I drove until the world blurred, gray sidewalks, cracked billboards, the kind of streets that feel like they've been holding their breath for decades. The neighborhood didn't smell like despair, exactly, but like detergent and tired dreams. And then I saw it, a crooked hand-painted sign nailed above a rusted doorway. Room for rent, $350 per month. Utilities included. It was the utilities included that caught me. It made something inside me unclench, just a little. Because when you have only $84 left, the words, included, and enough, start to blur together. The door stuck like it was warning me, but I pushed harder until it gave. Inside, the air was heavy with soap and metal, and there was this low, constant thrum from the washing machines below, like the heartbeat of something ancient and stubborn. The room itself wasn't much. A single window facing a brick wall. A ceiling bulb that flickered with the defiance of something half-dead. The wallpaper had peeled halfway off the wall like it had been trying to leave for years. There was a dent in the metal bed frame that looked suspiciously like a boot print. Still, this was the first space that was only mine. No one could walk in uninvited. No one could sigh at me or whisper about me from another room. I stood in the middle of that tiny, dying room and said out loud, "I can work with this." The landlord was an old man named Mr. Sykes. His voice was gravel wrapped in flannel. He didn't ask about my job, or my family, or my future. He only said, "No parties. No pets." "I don't have either," I replied. He nodded, handed me the keys, and that was it. No judgment. No disappointment. Just a transaction. I don't think he knew how much dignity that gave me. That first night, I lay on the thin mattress listening to the hum of the washing machines below me, their rhythm strangely comforting. The sound reminded me of heartbeats, like the building itself was still alive, even if I felt like I wasn't. During the day, I worked 12-hour shifts at a diner around the corner for tips that barely scraped past $40. I'd walk home with my apron smelling of grease, my feet burning, my mind buzzing. And then, while the world slept, I sat at my wobbly table and taught myself bookkeeping from free tutorials on YouTube. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even logical. But it was the only thing that felt like building instead of collapsing. That's when I met Mrs. Rivera. She lived across the hall, a soft-spoken widow with eyes that missed nothing. The first night she knocked, I thought I was being evicted. Instead, she handed me a paper plate stacked with tamales wrapped in foil. "You look like someone who forgets to eat," she said. "I do," I admitted. From then on, she'd stop by some evenings with leftovers, and sometimes we'd sit on the stairwell talking about nothing: weather, the broken elevator, her roses that wouldn't bloom. One night, after I told her how my family had said I'd probably fall apart by winter, she laughed, not unkindly. "Dignity is quiet," she told me. "But powerful." I didn't know what she meant then. I think I do now. By the third month, I'd saved enough from diner shifts and tiny bookkeeping gigs to open a business checking account, $1,127. I remember standing at the bank counter, pretending I belonged there. My voice cracked when I said the words "sole proprietorship," but the banker didn't flinch. She just nodded like it was normal, like maybe I was normal. I named the business Ember Accounting. Because embers are small and overlooked, and yet they can outlast the fire. That night, I bought myself a grocery store cupcake with too much frosting and a single candle. I lit it on my cracked windowsill and whispered, "Happy first day." And for one fleeting moment, I didn't feel like someone waiting to die through winter. I felt like someone planting spring. Of course, the doubts still came. They always did. I'd be halfway through entering numbers on a spreadsheet when my father's voice would slither in, calling me fragile. Or Claire's laugh, sharp as glass. Or my mother's silence, which somehow hurt more than words. But now, there was something else too. A counter voice. Quieter. Smaller. But mine. It whispered, "Keep going." I see now, looking back, that this was when my self-worth began to stir. Not roar. Not blaze. Just stir. At the time, I didn't call it hope. I just called it surviving. But sitting on that stairwell with Mrs. Rivera, sipping her cinnamon tea, listening to the washing machines hum like distant applause, I started to imagine a version of myself who didn't need saving. I wasn't her yet. Not even close. But for the first time, I believed she might exist. There are certain moments in life that don't announce themselves as turning points. They arrive disguised as something small, almost laughable, like an exhausted voice on the other end of a phone line saying, "I hate numbers. Can you just handle them for me?" Her name was Donna. She owned a tiny bakery on the east side, the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon the second you pushed open the door. She said she'd found my flyer taped to a corkboard at the laundromat. "I can pay you $400 a month," she said, almost apologetically, like she was handing me pocket change. 400. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told her yes, of course, absolutely, I'd start tomorrow. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them to stop. Because for the first time in months, someone was trusting me with something again. The next morning, I walked into Donna's bakery wearing my diner uniform because I didn't own anything else that felt remotely professional. She was petite and freckled, her hair pinned back with the kind of care that said she hadn't slept in days. She shoved a shoebox full of crumpled receipts toward me and said, "Good luck." I spent 3 hours sorting them on a flour-dusted counter in the back, using the corner of a sugar sack as my desk. And I loved every second. At the end, when I showed her how her expenses actually balanced out, Donna let out a shaky laugh. "You have no idea how much this helps," she said. I didn't tell her the truth, that she had just saved me. With Donna's payment, plus 2 weeks' worth of tips from the diner, I finally crossed the $1,000 mark. I walked into the bank with a wad of ones and fives so thick the teller had to smooth them flat one by one. My account balance blinked up at me $1,127. It felt like standing on dry land after months of treading water. I opened a business checking account that day. The banker, a woman about my age with tired eyes, didn't flinch when my voice cracked saying the words, "sole proprietorship." She just nodded and printed out the forms. I left the bank clutching my new checkbook like it was made of gold. But I knew I needed more than paperwork. I needed to make this real. So I went to a free legal clinic downtown, where a law student named Priya walked me through the registration forms, the tax ID process, and how to track business expenses without accidentally committing fraud. She drew diagrams on a yellow notepad, smiling at me like I wasn't pathetic, like I was just learning. When she handed me the completed sole proprietorship paperwork, she said, "Congratulations, Nora. You're officially in business." Her words echoed in my head the whole walk home. I wasn't anyone's failure. I was a business owner. A tiny one, sure. A barely surviving one. But real. That's how I met Sam. His coffee shop was next door to Donna's bakery. It smelled like roasted beans and ambition. I stopped in one morning, still buzzing from the high of opening my business account, and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a small black coffee. He noticed the folder under my arm and said, "You look like someone starting something scary." "I am," I admitted. He grinned, wiping his hands on a towel. "Then welcome to the club." Sam was one of those people who seemed wired directly into the sun, always smiling, always moving. He'd opened the shop 3 years ago after leaving a corporate job he hated. He told me he still woke up terrified half the time, convinced the whole place would collapse. "You learn to build while scared," he said. "That's the trick." We became friends in the slow, hesitant way lonely people do. I'd stop by after working on Donna's books, and he'd slip me leftover muffins, by accident. Sometimes we'd sit on the curb out front, sipping coffee while the city woke up around us. Sam never asked about my family. He just listened when I talked, which somehow felt rarer. He became my sounding board, the first person in months who seemed to see me as someone with a future, not just a cautionary tale. Still, progress didn't silence the ghosts. By December, I was juggling Donna's books, a few other tiny gigs I'd picked up online, and the diner shifts. My body was exhausted, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I even started catching myself humming while I worked. Then the Christmas card came. It arrived in a pristine white envelope, no return address, just my name scrawled in my mother's perfect cursive. My heart stuttered when I saw it. For half a second, I let myself imagine an apology. Or maybe not an apology, just acknowledgement. But when I opened it, inside was nothing except a generic printed snowflake and 3 names signed in looping ink. The Ellisons. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not Claire. Just the Ellisons. As if I were never part of them at all. The card slipped from my hands and hit the floor like something heavier than paper. I didn't cry at first. I just sat on the edge of my bed staring at it, waiting for some new version of me to stand up, brush it off, and keep going. But she didn't. Instead, I folded in on myself like a paper crane, shaking so hard I couldn't breathe. I buried my face in the pillow to muffle the sound and sobbed until my ribs ached. It wasn't just grief. It was the sudden, brutal realization that they might never see me again, really see me, even if I built a whole new world from the ashes. They didn't send that card to reconnect. They sent it to remind me I was gone. Later, after the tears had dried into salt on my skin, I sat at my wobbly table staring at the glow of my laptop screen. The spreadsheet columns blurred through my swollen eyes. And then, without meaning to, I whispered, "Keep going." It startled me, hearing my own voice in the quiet. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't hope. It was just survival, speaking softly. I see it more clearly now, looking back. This was the first time I understood that healing doesn't happen in some triumphant sweep. It happens in the spaces between heartbreak. In the way your hands still move, even when your heart doesn't want to. I finished Donna's payroll that night, wiping my cheeks with the back of my sleeve. It felt absurd. It also felt like power. Because even though I was cracked, I was still building. From scraps, yes. From whatever pieces were left. But building all the same. And somewhere in the hum of the laundromat below, the flicker of my self-worth caught a little more light. It was faint. Fragile. But alive. And for now, that was enough. It's strange how a whole year can disappear like snow on pavement, silent, dissolving before you realize it was ever there. One winter ago, I was counting quarters in a laundromat bathroom, praying the dryer didn't eat my last 2 shirts. Now, I'm staring at a spreadsheet that says I've grossed just over $45,000 this year. $45,000. I whisper it out loud sometimes, like a secret spell that might shatter if anyone else hears it. It isn't wealth, not by any stretch, but for someone who once thought she wouldn't make it past Christmas, it feels like a miracle. A hard one, sleepless miracle. Of course, the numbers don't tell the whole story. They don't mention the nights I woke at 3 a.m. with my laptop still open on my stomach, or the way my eyes blur after 12-hour shifts. They don't mention the dull ache in my hands from typing or the isolation that hums under my skin. Some days, I feel like I've built my life out of splinters and tape, functional, but held together by sheer stubbornness. And yet, for the first time, it's mine. The envelope arrives on a Tuesday, wedged between junk mail and a utility bill. The handwriting is instantly familiar, slanted, 2 tight loops. My mother's. Inside is a cream-colored card with gold embossing. You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Claire Ellison and Matthew Bradley. Claire. My younger sister. There's a photo tucked inside, Claire in a white dress that clings like it was sewn onto her, eyes sparkling, hand perched on Matthew's chest like she's already claimed her square of the world. They're standing in front of our parents' house, the big blue colonial with the wraparound porch and the kind of shutters people only pretend to close. The house they told me I'd never set foot in again. I flip the card over. There's no personal note, just the date, time, and formal attire requested. As if I'm a stranger. For a long while, I just sit at my tiny kitchen table, listening to the soft thump of dryers downstairs. The smell of detergent seeps through the floorboards. I wonder if this is a peace offering, or a summons. I go. I don't know why I do, exactly. Maybe to prove I've survived. Maybe to prove I'm not afraid of them anymore, or maybe just to see if they'll even look me in the eye. The Ellison house looks the same, except smaller. Funny how places shrink when you stop fearing them. The yard is immaculate, snow shoveled into perfect geometric banks. I park at the curb and sit in my car for a full minute before stepping out, like I'm entering enemy territory. Inside, the air smells of cinnamon and old rugs. Laughter bursts from the living room, sharp and familiar. People I don't recognize are scattered everywhere, holding glasses of champagne. Claire spots me from across the room. Her smile freezes halfway up her face. Nora, you came. Congratulations, I manage, handing her the small gift bag I picked up on my way here. Inside is a hand-thrown ceramic dish from a local artisan, something understated and warm. She thanks me without opening it, already looking over my shoulder. I drift around the room like a ghost. No one really engages me except for brief, polite nods. Aunt Linda says, "You look different," as if it's half accusation. Someone asks what I do now, and when I tell them I run a small bookkeeping business, they blink as though I've announced I grow moss for a living. Then come the quiet daggers. "So you're still around," says one of Claire's college friends with a brittle laugh, sipping her champagne. "Doing your little projects," adds another, as if they're talking about crafts at summer camp. I feel their words brushing against old scars, trying to reopen them. In the hallway, near the coat closet, I pause to catch my breath, and that's when I hear it. My father's voice. Deep. Steady. "I already wrote Nora out of the will," he's saying to someone. "It's cleaner that way. Less messy later." Something cold and metallic slides through my chest. I stand there, frozen, staring at the grain of the wooden floor. I don't hear the rest of what he says. It doesn't matter. My father has always spoken about people like their items on a ledger, and tonight he's balanced me right out of his books. I should crumble. I can feel the old instinct rise, the one that used to drag me to the bathroom at family dinners, lock the door, and cry silently until my eyes burned. But something different happens instead. A strange, unexpected stillness settles over me. I straighten my shoulders, smooth the front of my thrifted navy dress, and without another word, I walk out the door. The night air slices across my skin, crisp and honest. The sound of laughter dulls behind me as I cross the yard, heels crunching over packed snow. I don't cry. Not this time. Because here's the thing, my father might erase me from his paperwork, but he can't erase me from my own life. They said I wouldn't make it through the winter. That I'd collapse, that I'd crawl back. That I'd vanish. But I'm still here. And for the first time, standing alone under the pale moonlight, I realize I don't need their approval to exist. I drive back to the laundromat studio, the place that smells like soap and echoes with dryer hums, and I feel, not triumphant, exactly. Just steady. Like a tree that has decided to keep growing even if no one bothers to water it. When I get home, I peel off the dress, hang it carefully in my closet, and sit down at my desk. There's work to do, emails to answer, invoices to send. My body aches, my eyes sting, but I keep typing. Not because I need to prove them wrong anymore. Because I finally want to prove something to myself. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying your whole life on your back and praying it won't collapse. By early spring, that's exactly how I felt. My little bookkeeping business had grown faster than I ever imagined. It wasn't just one bakery anymore. I had a few local shops, a yoga studio, even a landscaping company. The invoices blurred together like watercolors, and while my income was steady, my nerves were frayed. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. already bracing for something to go wrong. And one night, while scrolling through yet another tax form at 1:30 a.m., I realized something bone deep. I had built this fragile, precious thing with nothing but grit and guesswork. But if I didn't protect it properly, one misstep could wipe it all away. So I made a decision. A terrifying one. I was going to make it official. I found a free legal clinic downtown that offered small business consultations on Saturdays. The waiting area smelled like old coffee and copier ink, and most of us were clutching manila folders like they were life jackets. The volunteer attorney was kind but brisk, the way people are when they know you've already been through enough. She walked me through the process of forming an LLC, explaining liability protection, tax structures, and the need for a separate business bank account. Then she said the part that made my stomach clench. It'll cost you about $1-800 total, filing fees, state registration, the CPA for your first year's books. But it's worth it if you want to stop living on the edge of collapse. $1-800. Almost everything I had left after rent and utilities. It wasn't just money, it was safety. But I did it anyway. I wrote the checks with trembling hands, every stroke of my pen feeling like a dare to the universe. A week later, I signed the papers, Ellison Ledger, LLC. My name. My risk. My responsibility. Next came contracts. Actual, printed contracts with my logo at the top and terms in clean black letters. It felt, grown up, in the scariest way. No more handshakes, no more, I'll pay you when I can, promises. Every client would get a written agreement, and every invoice had due dates and late fees. It was terrifying, and liberating. When I handed the new contracts to my existing clients, most just nodded and signed. But a few hesitated, and one even scoffed, "You're really getting serious about this, huh?" Yes, I thought. I am. The moment I stopped treating my business like a favor and started treating it like a business, something shifted. People started treating me differently. Respectfully. And then came the local clinic. A bustling family medical practice with 12 staff members, piles of paperwork, and financial chaos stuffed into filing cabinets. The director, Dr. Shaw, called me after hearing about my work from the bakery. We met in his cramped office while the sound of children crying filtered through the walls. He offered me $900 a month to clean up and maintain their books. I almost said yes before he finished speaking, but this time, I didn't. Instead, I smiled, slid my contract across his desk, and said, "I'd love to, as long as we can agree on these terms." He read them carefully, nodded, and signed. Just like that, Ellison Ledger, LLC had its first major client. I walked out of that clinic with my signed copy in hand, heart pounding. It felt like crossing a border, like I'd stepped from survival into legitimacy. But empowerment, I've learned, often arrives with its shadow close behind. The shadow came as an email from Claire. The subject line read, "Hey, sis," smiley face, which was already suspicious. Claire doesn't use smiley faces unless she wants something. Her message was short, written in the airy tone she used to use when asking to borrow my clothes. "I'm trying to plan the wedding budget and it's kind of overwhelming. Since you do all that bookkeeping stuff now, maybe you could help me sort it out? Just as a sister thing, of course. Would save me having to hire anyone. Love." I stared at the screen for a long time. A year ago, I would have said yes instantly, desperate for even a crumb of belonging. I would have stayed up nights designing spreadsheets, whispering to myself that maybe they were finally letting me back in. But not this time. Because the truth is, I don't do free anymore, not for people who once bet on my failure. Still, my hands trembled as I drafted the reply. I wrote it carefully, respectfully, like I was defusing a bomb. "Hi Claire. I'm glad to hear the wedding planning is going well. It sounds like such a beautiful time for you. I've made it a policy not to take on unpaid projects, even for family. It helps me keep clear lines and give my clients my best work. If you'd like, I'd be happy to send you my standard package and rates. Either way, I hope it all goes smoothly. Wishing you the best. Nora." I must have read that email 50 times before hitting send. My chest felt hollow, like I'd just thrown a match at a bridge. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach me. Within 2 days, I heard from Aunt Linda, via a thinly veiled Facebook comment under one of my business posts. "Some people forget where they came from." Then a voicemail from my mother. "Claire's just trying to start her life, Nora. You could have been supportive instead of transactional." Transactional. The word stung, even though I knew it was meant to. They didn't see the nights I spent on the floor of my studio calculating whether I could afford groceries. They didn't see me scraping together bus fare, or the hours I spent teaching myself accounting from free online tutorials because no one else believed in me. They only saw that I'd finally stopped asking them for scraps. And that scared them. That night, I sat alone at my desk while the dryers thumped downstairs, rereading my sent email. My stomach twisted with the old familiar dread. What if they cut me off completely this time? What if no one ever invites me back, ever? But beneath the dread, something else glowed. Something small but fierce. For the first time, I hadn't betrayed myself just to be loved. I'd chosen me. The days that followed were quiet. No calls from Claire. No more comments from relatives. The silence was its own kind of storm, but I weathered it. I focused on my clients, on building systems that made my days smoother, on taking slow walks at night under the humming streetlights. Sometimes, the loneliness clawed at me. I won't pretend it didn't. But it didn't swallow me whole. Because now, when I looked at my life, even with all its cracks, I saw something I had never seen before. Boundaries. Not walls. Just clear, steady lines that said, "This is who I am. This is what I'm worth." And for the first time in my life, I was starting to believe it. There's a point where exhaustion stops feeling like tiredness and starts feeling like gravity. Like something invisible has wrapped itself around your bones and is pulling you down, quietly, relentlessly. By late summer, that's where I was living, inside the gravity. My client list had doubled again. Between the bakery, the landscaping company, the clinic, and 3 new small shops, my calendar was a blur of deadlines. The money was coming in faster than it ever had, almost $6,000 a month now, but so were the hours. 12-hour days had become 14. Meals became something I remembered to do when my hands shook. My eyes throbbed from staring at spreadsheets. And somewhere between invoices and payroll reconciliations, I stopped noticing what day it was. I told myself it was temporary. Just a busy season. Just a little longer. But busy seasons don't end when you never let them. The night it happened, I was hunched over my desk at 1:48 a.m., trying to finish a quarterly report for the clinic. The laundromat downstairs was long closed, but the building hummed with phantom dryer noise. My vision kept doubling, the numbers slipping out of focus like minnows. I blinked hard, pressed my palms into my eye sockets, kept typing. And then the screen tilted. No, I tilted. The floor surged up at me like water. When I woke, there were voices. Blurred lights. A bitter taste in my mouth. I was lying on a hospital bed, a thin blanket over my legs, fur taped to my arm. A nurse leaned over me. "You fainted from exhaustion and dehydration," she said gently, like she was breaking bad news to a child. Later, the doctor used the word burnout, and something about hearing it from a professional made me want to both laugh and cry. As if this invisible monster finally had a name. I stayed overnight for monitoring. Just one night. Long enough to receive the bill $2,600 out of pocket after insurance. $2,600 for collapsing under the weight of my own ambition. When I returned to my little studio above the laundromat, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The desk where I'd built my escape now looked like a trap. I sat on the floor that night, back against the bed, knees pulled to my chest, and let the silence press against me until it almost hurt. If this is what survival costs, I thought, is it worth it? Mrs. Rivera knocked the next afternoon. She was carrying a container of soup and wearing her ever-present house slippers. Her gray hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her eyes, sharp as sparrow wings, scanned me the moment I opened the door. "You look like paper," she said, brushing past me without asking. She set the soup on the counter and turned to face me, hands on her hips. I heard from the super what happened. "Fainted," they said. "You can't keep doing this alone, Mija. Even God didn't try to build the world in one day." I muttered something about just needing rest, but she shook her head, her earring swinging. "Rest helps, yes. But so does help. Real help. Someone to take some of this weight before it crushes you." She left the soup, kissed the air near my cheek, and shuffled out, muttering something in Spanish that I didn't quite catch, except for one word, cansada. Tired. The word stayed with me long after the soup was gone. I resisted the idea for days. Hiring help felt impossible. Dangerous. Like handing over my fragile, hard-won world to someone who could drop it. But the truth was written in the hollow ache in my bones. I couldn't keep doing this alone. So I posted a simple listing online, part-time assistant for bookkeeping firm. 10 hours per week to start. Must love spreadsheets and quiet rooms. I got 3 replies. 2 vanished after the first email. The third was Maya. She was 22, still finishing her accounting degree, with round glasses and a laugh that sounded like she was constantly surprised the world was funny. She had worked part-time at the campus finance office and was looking for something steadier. When we met at the coffee shop, she showed up with a color-coded planner and more questions than I had answers for. Something about her steadiness calmed me. So I hired her. At first, every instinct screamed at me to hover, to double-check her every keystroke, to quietly redo her work after she left. But Maya was good. Better than good, she was organized, curious, and fearless about learning. And slowly, I started to breathe again. I cut my own pay by $600 a month to afford her hours. It was terrifying. But having her meant I could go to bed at 10 p.m. instead of 2. It meant the stack of unanswered emails shrank. It meant the clinic's billing stopped feeling like a live grenade. Clients didn't notice the difference, except that I got faster, more precise. The business grew. But in the quiet moments, the doubts crept in. Was I building something real, or just a bigger cage? Sometimes I'd watch Maya packing up her laptop at the end of the day, her energy still bright, her future still unfolding, and I'd wonder if I'd traded my whole life for balance sheets. Success is loud on paper, but it's quiet when you're alone at midnight, listening to the hum of old dryers through the floor, wondering who you're becoming. I had crossed so many lines to get here. Legal lines. Emotional ones. But the line I feared most was the one between who I was and who I used to be, and how far apart they were drifting. That night, I opened my bedroom window and let the city air in, heavy with the smell of soap and asphalt. I stood there barefoot, listening to the hum of cars on the avenue below. And I whispered to no one. Please let this be worth it. Not the money. Not the business. Just the chance that maybe this isn't the end of me. Maybe it's the beginning. 2 full years had passed since the night Nora collapsed at her desk, body trembling, vision blurred, clutching her chest as if sheer will could hold her together. That night had marked the beginning of a reckoning, a boundary drawn not in ink or paper, but in the faint echo of her own heartbeat, fragile, yet unwilling to stop. Now, the world around her looked startlingly different. Her business had grown beyond anything she once believed possible. What began as frantic late-night budgeting sessions in her living room had become a thriving financial consultancy, quietly serving a roster of local clinics, bakeries, and startups scattered across the city. Her small team of 3 worked from a sunlit office above a flower shop, where laughter occasionally drifted between the clicking keyboards. They earned over $120,000 a year in revenue now, a number that once felt like fantasy, and though she paid herself modestly, there was stability, predictability, in her life for the first time. Yet perhaps the truest change lived not in her income statements, but in her posture. Nora no longer flinched when clients questioned her rates. She no longer apologized for her invoices or padded her proposals with nervous disclaimers. When she signed her name at the bottom of a contract now, she did it with the kind of steady, deliberate stroke that only comes from surviving your own doubt. On a quiet autumn afternoon, driving back from a client meeting, she took a detour, one she hadn't taken in years. The route curved toward the old, tree-lined boulevard where her parents still lived, in the same white-columned mansion that had cast its shadow over her childhood. She slowed the car as she approached, as if her body still expected to tighten, to shrink. It was just as she remembered, the manicured hedges, the heavy oak doors, the stone lion standing sentinel. Yet as she sat at the curb, engine humming softly beneath her, she felt nothing. Not longing. Not anger. Not even grief. Just distance. Like she was watching a photograph from someone else's life, a house that had once contained her, but never known her. She realized she didn't crave their approval anymore. The space where that hunger used to live was simply empty, and for the first time, that emptiness didn't scare her. She smiled, faintly, and pulled away from the curb. The mansion grew small in her rearview mirror, then vanished entirely. A week later, she received an email from Sam, the former cafe owner who'd once given Nora her first real shot at managing a business budget. Sam had sold the cafe the previous year and now ran a women's entrepreneurship network downtown. We're hosting a panel for small business owners next month. I immediately thought of you. Would you speak? Tell your story? Nora stared at the email for a long time, her stomach tightening. Public speaking had always terrified her. She preferred the quiet, controlled world of spreadsheets and strategy meetings. But the idea tugged at her, sharp and unsettling. Part of her wanted to decline. Another part whispered, maybe it's time. She wrote back, yes. I'll do it. The panel was held in a repurposed warehouse-turned-arts venue, its exposed brick walls draped in string lights. The space buzzed with conversation and the soft clink of coffee cups. Dozens of women filled the rows of folding chairs, some dressed in crisp blazers, others in jeans and hope. They reminded Nora of herself, back when she was still convincing herself she had the right to even sit at the table. Backstage, her palms slicked with sweat. She clutched her note cards like a lifeline. Sam, radiant and unflappable, squeezed her shoulder. Just tell them the truth, she said softly. That's all they need. When it was her turn, Nora walked onto the small stage. The spotlight hit her like a warm slap, sudden and blinding. For a moment she could hear her own heartbeat louder than the room. She took a breath. "I was told," she began, her voice trembling, "that I wouldn't make it through my first winter." The room quieted instantly. Dozens of faces turned toward her. I had no savings, no support, no safety net. Just a laptop on a dining room table and this wild idea that I could build something of my own. I worked until my hands shook. I skipped meals to pay bills. I collapsed, literally collapsed, because I thought asking for help meant I wasn't strong enough. Her voice steadied as she continued, like a river finding its bedrock. She spoke of the nights she cried over spreadsheets, the mornings she wanted to disappear, the strange way success can feel like loneliness when there's no one to share it with. She told them about hiring her first assistant, how terrifying it was to trust someone with her dream. About the clinic that believed in her when her own family didn't. About the moment she stood outside her parents' mansion and realized she didn't need to be seen by them to exist. And then, as the last words caught gently in her throat, she said, "They told me I wouldn't survive the winter. But I did. And if you're sitting here wondering if you will, if you can, I promise you, you can." Silence. Then applause erupted, rising like a wave. It wasn't polite applause. It was the kind that crashes from the gut, the kind that says we see you, and we see ourselves in you. For a flicker of a moment, Nora felt something shift inside her. A quiet click, like the final piece of a lock falling into place. She wasn't the girl begging to be believed anymore. She wasn't the woman building something just to prove she could. She was simply herself, steady, imperfect, alive. After the panel ended, strangers approached her with tears in their eyes. One young woman in a denim jacket whispered, "I thought I was the only one." Another pressed a small thank you note into her hand. Nora walked to her car under the soft glow of streetlights, the night air cool and gentle against her face. The city hummed around her, distant traffic, laughter from a bar down the block, but inside her, there was only stillness. Not the brittle stillness of fear, but the quiet kind. The kind that feels like home. She started the engine, and as the headlights cut through the darkness, she realized, this wasn't just proof of survival. It was proof of life. It began as a whisper, the kind that floats on the edges of conversations and only reaches you when you've stopped straining to hear. Nora hadn't thought about her parents' mansion in months, not since that autumn afternoon she drove past it and felt only distance, like watching a ghost from someone else's memory. But the whisper found her anyway. One of her clients, a real estate attorney with a knack for local gossip, mentioned it offhand during a meeting. Strange times, he'd murmured, scrolling through property listings on his tablet. Even the big houses are crumbling. The Ellison place, your parents' old house, just hit the market. Foreclosure proceedings behind the scenes. Listed at $1.4 million. Nora's breath caught, though she kept her expression neutral. The Ellison mansion. The house of white columns and hollow laughter. The house where silence had been used like a weapon and love was a currency she never seemed to earn. She forced a light laugh. "Interesting," she said, like it meant nothing. But that night, lying awake in the soft glow of her phone screen, she found the listing herself. There it was, 12,400 square feet of marble and memory. Photos of the sweeping staircase, the solarium with its cracked tiles, the cavernous dining room where her father once presided over Sunday dinners like a monarch at court. The place looked beautiful and empty, like a museum after hours. She felt nothing, and then something far sharper than nostalgia. Not desire. Not revenge. Just clarity. The house had never been a home. It was a set, a stage. And now, that stage was collapsing under the weight of all the illusions propped upon it. Her parents were slipping. Their empire had eroded while they pretended otherwise. And now, for the first time, Nora saw an opportunity, not to hurt them, but to end the story on her own terms. Over the next 6 weeks, she moved in silence. She didn't walk into the deal as their daughter. She walked in as a businesswoman. Through a holding LLC she'd quietly established the year prior, Nora assembled the scaffolding of her offer. She gathered investors, 3 trusted contacts from her client network, each contributing capital in exchange for equity. She leveraged her company's business credit line, collateralized against her firm's consistent revenue stream, to secure the remainder. It was bold. Risky. Terrifying. But it was calculated. She offered $1.05 million, cash, clean, no contingencies, 21-day close. The bank, weary from months of dead negotiations, accepted. There were no family names attached to the paperwork, only corporate signatures and notarized seals. By the time her parents even realized a sale was imminent, the deal was done. Nora didn't tell them in advance. She didn't owe them the performance of explanation. But on the morning the deed transferred, she drove to the mansion, not out of sentiment, but to stand on the soil where she once felt invisible and small, and see how it felt to arrive as someone who belonged nowhere and everywhere all at once. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Her parents were there, waiting by the front steps. Someone must have called them after the sale closed, and they had come, frantic, to see which faceless stranger had bought their world. But when Nora stepped out of the car, their faces fractured. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her father's jaw tightened, the same sharp click of his teeth she remembered from childhood, the sound he made when reality didn't obey him. "You," he said, voice thin with disbelief. "You bought it?" "Yes," Nora replied simply. Her heels clicked against the stone as she walked up the steps, steady and slow. "I did." There was a silence so taut it almost hummed. Her mother's eyes glimmered with something, rage or sorrow, it was hard to tell. "Did you do this to humiliate us?" Nora paused. She let the question hang. Then she met her mother's gaze, calm as still water. "No," she said. "I didn't buy this house to humiliate you. I bought it because it's just property." Her father let out a scoff, half laugh, half snarl, but she kept going, her voice soft yet unshakable. "And I am not." They flinched, though she hadn't raised her tone. Because it was the first time she'd ever stood on this threshold and spoken as someone who didn't need permission to exist. "This house," she added, gesturing to the towering facade, "was never my home. It was just a place where you lived. And I think I had to own it once, just to understand it no longer owns me." Her father opened his mouth, then closed it again. Her mother turned her face away, blinking fast, as if something had cracked and she was trying desperately to keep the pieces from showing. Nora didn't wait for their blessing or their outrage. She didn't need either. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust. Echoes trailed through the halls like ghosts trying to remember who they once were. She wandered through the rooms, alone, her footsteps soft on the worn Persian rugs. In the grand dining room, she paused. This was where she used to sit, small and silent, while her father held court. She remembered the way her mother's bracelets clinked like distant wind chimes as she gestured through stories about people Nora had never met. She remembered how her own voice never quite seemed to reach across the table. Now the table was gone. Just a pale outline on the floor where it had once stood. She stood in the center of that space, wrapped in stillness, and felt free. The house was only walls and air. It had no power except the power she gave it, and she wasn't giving it any more. In the weeks that followed, the sale became quiet local news. Headlines called her the surprise buyer and speculated about her plans. Nora said nothing. She converted the property into a retreat center for women entrepreneurs, a place where ideas could grow without permission, where voices didn't have to beg to be heard. She kept one small corner suite for herself, not as a residence, but as a reminder. A single room in which to sit and breathe when she needed to remember how far she'd come. Her parents moved into a modest condominium in the city. They didn't speak to her directly after that day, though word filtered through distant cousins that her mother still referred to the mansion as the Winter House, as if renaming it might restore the story. Nora didn't correct her. Let them call it what they wanted. She knew the truth. It had never been theirs. Not really. It had only ever been a cage she'd finally learned how to unlock. When she returned one last time to oversee the renovations, the workers had stripped away the heavy drapes and opened the windows wide. Sunlight flooded in, touching corners that had been dark for decades. Dust danced in the air like golden snow. Nora stood in the center of the great hall and closed her eyes. She thought of the girl who once lived here, who whispered dreams into her pillow and believed no one would ever hear her. And then, softly, she said aloud, "I see you." Her voice echoed back, warm and whole. This time, the house stayed silent. And that silence didn't swallow her. It bowed. The first thing Nora did was strip the mansion of its silence. For months after the sale, crews buzzed in and out, painters, electricians, carpenters, all reshaping the cavernous rooms into something that finally breathed. Heavy curtains were torn down, revealing long-forgotten sunlight. The chandelier in the foyer was lowered and cleaned until it glittered like a held breath. What had once been the formal parlor, her mother's kingdom of porcelain figurines and whispered judgments, was transformed into a shared co-working lounge with wide tables, free coffee, and soft instrumental music drifting from ceiling speakers. Nora named the project the Winter House Collective. It was fitting, she thought, to turn a place built on exclusion into one designed for beginnings. Women came from every corner of the county, a baker with dreams of opening her own storefront, a young architect still paying off student loans, a divorced mother of two who wanted to start a small marketing firm from scratch. They carried laptops and lunchboxes and hope, filling the long empty halls with laughter and quiet determination. The mansion, for the first time, felt alive. And yet, underneath the hum of construction and planning, Nora carried a knot of tension in her chest. It had nothing to do with paint colors or lease contracts. It was the question she had been circling for weeks, the one she could no longer avoid. What to do about her parents? They were still in the city condo, pretending the mansion was nothing more than an old chapter they had closed voluntarily. Her father gave interviews to financial blogs about downsizing for efficiency, while her mother posted curated photos of balcony brunches and captioned them with breezy quotes about reinvention. But Nora knew the truth: they were waiting. Waiting to see if she would invite them back, or if she would cut them out entirely and let the story rot into scandal. She didn't want a scandal. She also didn't want vengeance. What she wanted was peace, something her family had never known how to hold without crushing it. So she wrote them a letter. Not an email, not a text, not something that could spiral into arguments. A real letter, handwritten, folded in thirds, slipped into a cream envelope. She spent an entire afternoon drafting it until every word was soaked in clarity. She told them she was converting the mansion into a co-working and mentorship hub for women-owned small businesses. She told them she wanted the place to be about growth, not ghosts. And then she offered them two options. They could return as tenants, paying fair market rent, living in the North Wing, with complete privacy and no expectation of social contact. Or they could walk away entirely, with dignity, and she would arrange professional movers to help. No strings, she wrote. No performances. Just clarity. Then she signed her name. No flourish. No apologies. She mailed it on a Tuesday. They didn't reply for 12 days. Instead, Claire showed up. Nora was in the sunroom-turned-conference space, measuring shelving units, when her younger sister stormed through the door like a hurricane made of perfume and resentment. "I can't believe you," Claire said, before Nora could even greet her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Nora set the measuring tape down slowly. "Hello to you too." "This isn't just a house," Claire snapped. "It's the Ellison legacy. Our family name means something in this town, and you," she flung her arms out toward the open room, where bright paint gleamed on the walls. "You've turned it into a co-working space for strangers." "Not strangers," Nora said gently. "Just people no one else made room for." "That's not the point." Claire's voice trembled, not with sadness, but with outrage wrapped around fear. "You've ruined everything Dad built." "Dad built an image," Nora said quietly. "Not a family." Claire's eyes flashed. You're destroying us. No, Nora replied. I'm just refusing to keep pretending we were whole. The words landed like stones dropped into a well. Claire's mouth opened, then shut. Her face flushed, her chin lifted. And then, with a sharp exhale that sounded almost like a sob, she spun on her heel and stalked out, heels clicking like gunfire across the old tiles. Nora didn't follow her. She didn't try to soothe her or win her back. That was the old map, the one where Nora's worth depended on keeping everyone else comfortable. She let her sister go. Her parents sent a response a week later, typed on heavy paper with her father's signature at the bottom like a seal of authority. They chose the condo. While we appreciate your offer, it read, we feel it would be best for all involved to make a clean separation. We wish you well. That was it. No warmth, no olive branch, no acknowledgement of the years between them. Just polite erasure, as though she were a business acquaintance who had completed a transaction. Nora sat at her desk for a long time after reading it. Then she folded the letter neatly and placed it in a folder marked personal. Not family. That word no longer required her to set herself on fire to keep it alive. Not every tie burned. A few weeks later, her cousin Anna came by with a box of pastries and a shy smile, offering to volunteer as a mentor for teen girls learning bookkeeping. Her uncle sent a card that said, in shaky handwriting, proud of you. Always were. Even Claire, though she didn't speak to Nora directly, quietly removed the old photos of the mansion from her social media. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a kind of ceasefire, and that was enough for now. Some relationships were not meant to be repaired, only released. Others were simply waiting for new soil to grow in. As the months passed, the Winter House Collective thrived. The halls filled with life and laughter, with risk-takers and dreamers who spilled coffee on the marble floors and left post-it notes of encouragement on each other's desks. Sometimes, as Nora walked through the wide front hall where her father once stood like a gatekeeper, she thought of her family, not with longing, but with a soft, distant gratitude. They had shown her what love wasn't. So she could finally choose what love could be. On the evening the first cohort of women graduated from her mentorship program, the house glowed with string lights and the sound of clinking glasses. Mrs. Rivera came, leaning on her cane, and squeezed Nora's hand with quiet pride. Sam beamed from across the room, raising a toast to her. Nora looked around at the sea of faces, women who had come here trembling with uncertainty and were leaving with blueprints, business plans, and their heads held high. And she realized something, she had built more than a business. She had built a map. Not the one she was given, filled with traps disguised as traditions. A new map, drawn in her own handwriting, one that led not back to the past but forward into something entirely her own. For the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving her family. She was living beyond them. The mansion no longer feels like theirs. It doesn't even feel like hers. It feels like ours. A year has passed since Nora stood on the marble steps, holding the keys in one trembling hand and her silence in the other. Back then, the halls were hollow, echoing with memories of slammed doors and swallowed words. Now, they are full, brimming with voices, laughter, and the steady rhythm of lives being built. The Winter House has become a living thing. On Monday mornings, the air smells of espresso and ambition. By noon, every shared table hums with conversation, accountants swapping ideas with artisans, architects sketching beside social workers drafting grant proposals. Upstairs, the mentorship rooms buzz with energy as young women practice elevator pitches, fumble through spreadsheets, and discover the thrill of saying their goals out loud without apologizing for them. Down in the garden, where her father once paid landscapers to sculpt sterile hedges, Nora planted wildflowers. They've exploded in color, violet, yellow, deep red, spilling over the stone walls like a rebellion against order. It's beautiful. And it's nothing like what the Ellisons would have built. That, she decides, is exactly the point. Her days have softened, even as her work has grown. She still manages the business, still mentors newcomers, still reviews contracts and budgets, but she no longer measures her worth by how many hours she bleeds into the workday. She has boundaries now, dinner at 6, phone off by 8, Sundays reserved for stillness. Sometimes she paints, nothing serious, just slow brushstrokes on wide, unframed canvases that she hangs in the hallways. A few of the women have started calling them hope maps. Sometimes she tends the small vegetable patch near the back terrace. Her hands smell of rosemary and dirt. It grounds her in ways the polished marble never did. And sometimes, often, she simply sits on the wide front steps with a mug of tea, watching the women stream in and out of the doors she opened, knowing she no longer has to prove anything to anyone to deserve peace. Her circle has shifted, but it is real. Sam visits often, bringing croissants and the kind of teasing only a true friend can get away with. Mrs. Rivera still lives in her little apartment above the laundromat, though she has taken to calling herself the founding grandmother of the Winter House, which makes everyone laugh and no one disagree. Anna helps run the mentorship program now. The girls adore her. Nora can hear them from down the hall, squealing with pride when they solve a tricky balance sheet or nail a mock client pitch. It is not the family she was born into. It is the family she chose. And they chose her back. The letter arrives on a Wednesday. It's tucked between utility bills and business flyers, almost unremarkable, until she sees the handwriting. Neat. Angled. Firm. Her father's. She takes it inside and sits at her desk, the same desk where she first taught herself bookkeeping on an old second-hand laptop, years ago, when she was just a girl above a laundromat trying to outrun the gravity of her last name. She opens the envelope. It's only a single page. Nora. I heard about what you've done with the house. I was wrong about many things. I see that now. You are strong, not because of us, but because you had to be without us. I don't know if this is an apology. I think it might be gratitude, in disguise. Thank you for proving me wrong. And, in a way, for proving me right. Dad. Her hands don't shake as she folds it back up. There are no tears. No surge of longing. Just a quiet stillness, like the air after a storm finally passes. She doesn't need to reply. Forgiveness, she realizes, is not always about returning to the table. Sometimes it's about finally standing up from it, and walking toward your own. That evening, she stands in the garden as the sun dissolves behind the trees, the sky melting into shades of gold and rose. Laughter drifts from the windows behind her, her community, her chosen family, celebrating another small victory inside. She thinks about the first winter, the one they all swore would swallow her whole. How they said she'd never survive without their name, their money, their approval. How they said she'd be dead by winter. And how, instead, she had stood in the cold and built something warmer than they could ever imagine. Nora exhales, slow and certain. The air smells like earth and new beginnings. They said I'd be dead by winter, she whispers, smiling as the lights flicker on inside the mansion behind her. But I built my spring instead. She steps back inside, into her life, into her future, into the home she made not from inheritance, but from her own hands. And the door closes softly behind her, not like an ending, but like the start of everything. If Nora's story touched something in you, if you've ever been told you wouldn't make it, or felt invisible in the shadow of people who doubted you, remember this: you are allowed to start over. You are allowed to choose yourself. Share this story with someone who needs that reminder tonight. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what part resonated with you most. And if you're on your own journey of rebuilding, subscribe and stay with us. You're not alone anymore. This is where new beginnings quietly begin.